In the perpetual meantime of a sheltered eternity, most are content to live and not to dream. But in the hidden corners where the gods' gaze does not fall, there are those who dream of dreaming. Buried in the depths of this world lies smoldering remains, a warning to those that dare trespass.
It's all a fugazi. You know what a fugazi is?
Oh, fugazi. It's fake.
Yeah, fugazi. It's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's a fairy dust. It doesn't exist. It's never landed. It is no matter. It's not on the elemental chart. It's not fucking real.
No holds barred. We're cracking this whole thing wide open. Everything. Everyone's destiny and fate within the false sky has been hijacked. But is it for their own good? What lies beyond Teyvat's borders? Truly, what is out there in the HoYoverse? And truly, is the false sky actually protecting everyone from the true disasters that lie beyond? Possibly even the Honkai itself. The trapped, simulated world everyone lives in. Defying fate. What fate actually means in Teyvat. How it connects to the stars and the moon. True origin of Paimon. The primordial one and all its angels. The origins of the dragons. The original inhabitants of Teyvat. And what lies beyond the false sky. What Teyvat is connected to. We're going down the rabbit hole and we're not leaving anything off the table. This will be by far my most ambitious video. I don't even know how long it's going to be by the time this is all over. So buckle up, because by the end of this video, I'm going to attempt to unravel everything that's going on, from start to finish. But where do we begin? Because talking about Teyvat in its broader sense is like trying to clean up your house when everything's a disaster. Where do you start? I thought about this a lot, and a good place to start before talking about what lies beyond the false sky and what's out there. The greater overarching plot that is Genshin Impact. I think it's better to start within the false sky. The world of Teyvat as it is, with its false sky, false stars, and false moon. Then from there build on how Teyvat will ultimately connect with the other HoYoverse games, cause make no mistake, Genshin has been isolated up until this point. But we all know we're slowly building towards that coming crashing down. It is inevitable.
I've discovered something far more important and far more terrifying. The stars, the sky, it's all a gigantic hoax. A lie.
Seriously, who's gonna fall for that one when you can just lift your head up at night and see them up there twinkling away?
Oh, you are so naive, it kills me. Still, can't really blame you. After all, I used to believe the same thing myself. Up until a few moments ago, that is. What was the Jester thinking? He must have had some inkling of what we might discover on this mission. Would it really have been so difficult to give me a little forewarning? Or maybe he just wanted to give me a fright.
The prophecy. Yes, what has been prophesied will be fulfilled. You may view such things as the history of the future. People call such things fate, and it is written in the stars. It cannot so easily be altered.
The stars, the sky.
And it is written in the stars.
It's all a gigantic hoax.
Just as prophecies are usually only the future as seen from the perspectives of the gods, could things be happening in hidden corners where the gods' gaze does not fall? Are the things that you shall see different from the fate that the gods perceive?
You've probably noticed that the moon never changes. It's always a full moon, and the day and night cycle are all fixated. The era of the false sky is after the Great War in the Heavens took place. We're going to dissect the living crap out of that in a bit. But let's stick with what the false sky actually means, because it's heavily linked with everyone's fate. Fate and destiny are intertwined with everyone in Teyvat, and everyone's connected through Unreconciled and their constellations. Now, to simplify this, Unreconciled acts like a database for Teyvat. It connects everyone neurologically like a hive mind. We've seen the ramifications of when it's tampered with. Obviously, unless you're integrated within Teyvat's system, you're exempt from this like a descender. the Traveler, and Zhongli, to name a few that still remember Ruka Devata, but everyone else forgets. So Teyvat is like a hive mind. It's a controlled bubble simulated universe in a sense, controlled by the heavenly principles with its set of laws and rules, and everyone's fate predetermined. They mention fate a lot in this game. That is why you have a ton of voice lines about characters and fate, how it's already been woven, and that there's history of the future. And then Dainsleif with his cryptic line in the original Teyvat trailer says, "Fate can be yours to reweave."
The threads of all fate will be yours to reweave.
Every single significant event and character within Genshin Impact, it's all about defining fate. It's always been about fate. What actually is fate? Fate is a development of events beyond a person's control, predetermined by a supernatural force or power, an entity. It's going to happen and it cannot be changed. But there are things that you can do to defy fate, or at least mitigate it. Think of a tornado or a hurricane headed your way. There's nothing you can do, it's coming, it's inevitable. What you can do are take actions. Even looking what Focalors did in Fontaine. She allowed the prophecy to come to fruition, allowed fate to continue on course, but still was able to defy it, and everyone survived by simply allowing what Celestia wanted to happen. It just didn't have the outcome Celestia wanted. But Teyvat and its rules by the heavenly principles has relinquished that control away. Everyone's fate is predetermined, especially when it comes to vision holders in Teyvat, and the fake stars among the fake sky. The greatest event in Genshin Impact to this day was in 1.1. I feel bad for people that never got to play it. It was the Unreconciled Stars event. Like, we literally got the first reveal of the false sky and a Harbinger reveal within a limited event. Those were the good old days. But what does Unreconciled mean actually? Well, it actually means modified or incompatible, which totally makes sense when you think about the false sky and everything's an illusion within the sky. Everything is a simulated universe you're living in. Irminsul is quite literally like a databank for Teyvat. Nahida being the avatar of Irminsul, her regular attacks are even like a keyboard. Quite literal reference. But even among the skies of Teyvat, everyone's constellation predetermines their fate. It's written in the stars, but it's all part of the database in the fake sky that's Teyvat, the current system and rules, where everyone is trapped. That is why all significant characters have a constellation, and astrologers like Mona or her master Barbara Luth can read them. So Unreconciled Stars, unreconciled meaning fake, modified, or incompatible, false stars falling from the sky. We're sent to investigate with Mona and Fischl. This is where we met Scaramouche for the first time. He was sent here by Piero himself to investigate, and this is where Scaramouche learns about the false sky. He says the stars, the sky, it's a giant hoax and a lie. Obviously, this blew our minds back in the day, but what he really meant is that Scaramouche in that moment learned that they're in a program, almost so to speak. Everyone's fate and their constellations predetermined. The hive mind that is Irminsul. Learning these truths, almost like learning you're in a simulation or a video game, is what caused King Deshert's civilization to crumble with madness. And Mona, being an astrologer, can almost like a computer hit file and search up different people through their constellations and look into their personalities, look into who they are. That is why she's able to do it, and every character has a constellation. And that is why outsiders or descenders are capable of defying natural orders of Teyvat, wield multiple elements, and do miraculous things that are not part of the program. And because Teyvat runs like a mechanism, the future can be mapped out. But yet, Mona can't predict people like the Travelers' futures, because they're not part of the data system of Teyvat. They're not integrated into this network. Even somebody like Arlecchino glitches because I feel she's not quite compatible or integrated within Teyvat's laws and systems either, but she comes from Conria and the Crimson Moon Dynasty, and we know that they've dabbled outside of Teyvat when they shouldn't have, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. But like I said, destiny and fate of a vision holder especially is written in the constellations as data of the vision bearer, and is more or less coded within Teyvat. The constellations and fates are represented in the sky, and seen as the fake stars we can see in the false sky. Somehow our Abyssal sibling must have had their data encoded within Teyvat, which is why they're no longer a descender. How could we be a descender and our sibling not when we traveled many worlds together, chronologically and canonly? That happened. Before we got to Teyvat, we traveled many worlds, which confirms that we're both not from Teyvat, and there are many worlds out there. Teyvat is not isolated in its own little universe. And what are visions? They're granted to people with particularly strong wills, which are threatening to the heavenly principles and the laws, the rules, the mechanism. This is why they are singled out and can ascend to Celestia, so the heavenly principles can keep an eye on them. Vision holders, as Venti told us, are allogenes, and they are people with high potential. But that means they're people that could potentially break the samsara, that is, the mechanism of Teyvat, the laws and the rules, and the hive mind network. It's almost like having an employee that's really, really good. So you're going to give them a promotion, ascend to Celestia, instead of them trying to find true liberation outside of Teyvat, is destined to fail. Because like a giant computer database, there's going to be cracks and breaks in the seal. Look at the Fitsui Harbingers. They're trying to defy fate. They are aware that they're in a false world. The sky and the stars are fake. And the method they're trying to choose to defy this fate, this immovable object heading towards them, is to brutally stop it by brute force in its tracks. Conria took a different approach to defy fate, defy the laws of this world. Like Dainsleif said, the gods goad us with their 7 treasures, but fate can be ours to reweave. And the survivors of Conria to this day, the Abyss Order, with the loom of fate, they're trying to cheat the system, hack the computer that is Teyvat, rewrite the rules, while the Harbingers are trying to brute force the heavenly principles and outright overthrow them. But many have tried in the past to do this. King Deshard defied Celestia and the rules, the status quo. Him and his people died gruesome deaths, but he learned this truth from a Seelie named the Goddess of Flowers Nabu, similar to the Lord of the Night Kingdom that we just learned about in 5.1. And the 4 Shades, they are from a world before this false sky, before the status quo. Again, let's not get ahead of ourselves here, we're getting there. The Unreconciled stars were literally the stars and dreams of an adventurer that climbed the highest peak in Mondstadt that ended up being Musk Reef. And people were going into a dreamlike state, inheriting that individual's memories and ambitions of the past. That's because his constellation and fate, his entire story, was quite literally falling from the sky. His constellation and database within Teyvat, and the Fitsui Harbingers were there to investigate. Now, there are obviously characters like Alice and the Hegzen Circle. Those individuals can defy this world's laws as well. They seem to be MacGuffined outside of it. We're not even 100% sure if they're from Teyvat or have left and come back and just are fully aware of the system and are able to kind of move within it like a virus. Irminsul, and the stars can't pick up. And then the 5 Sinners of Conria. One that I'm very intrigued about that kind of goes very well with this too is the Visionary, one of the sinners Dainsleif mentioned. We obviously know about Serta Luigi and Rhine Daughter. Those are the main 2 we've been exposed to. The Visionary being named Vedonir, who is the eagle that sits on top the World Tree in Norse mythology, which Teyvat and its World Tree, aka Irminsul, is heavily based on. And what further implicates this whole bubble simulated universe is the Genesis Pearls, or the Genesis Crystals. The item shop in Genshin Impact actually tells us a lot. Along with the Battle Pass trailer, oh my god, we haven't even broken the tip of the iceberg here. This is going to be a long ride. This is a little reprieve into the video here, I'm telling you. We're just getting started. The Genesis Crystals are a reference to the Hebrew Bible or Christian Old Testament, like we know Genshin's referenced many times with Gnosticism and other real-world religion. It references the creation of the world and then the God's destruction of that world, sparing only Noah and his family on the ark, which pretty much reminds me of the current Teyvat in the False Sky, this little ark that they're on, this little system, this little isolated, airtight world. And the God's destruction reminds me of the war in the heavens. What I like to call before the False Sky and the current system of Teyvat, before Sun and Moon. There's a reason it's called Before Sun and Moon. I think this is a direct reference to now having the False Sky, the same full moon when night rolls around, and then the sun rising the next day. The day and night cycle, the sky and the stars, it's all a facade, we know this now. And the war in the heavens, the primordial one, and the shades. along with all the Seelies and angels that lived in Celestia, are from a world and time before Sun and Moon. Now, if everyone's fate is predetermined through their constellation, the stars, and Irminsul, and everyone's connected neurologically, and Irminsul can be weaponized to keep that control, keep the status quo. And all of these factions throughout the years are trying to defy their fates, defy the laws of Celestia. It makes perfect sense why Irminsul is foreshadowed to be burned, why the ley lines are so important, why forbidden knowledge exists in the first place, why a place like Enkanomiya and all the ancient civilizations that were around before Sun and Moon have these ancient secrets of old Celestia, the real Teyvat. But that still leaves the question as to why Teyvat was isolated in the first place. What lies beyond the false sky? Where did the Abyss actually come from? Along with all of the Descenders, who are they? And what's with the shattered moon that we can see in Natlan's story quest, that broken shattered moon beyond the false sky? Because the reality is, Teyvat in its own little world might just be a grain of rice in the ocean, in the vast HoYoverse. Now that we've talked about the current false sky, how Teyvat functions and how people are trying to break free of it, let's go back way to the beginning. The original inhabitants of Teyvat, the dragons, the sovereigns, and the Dragon King Nibelung. This is as far back as Teyvat's history predates. Nibelung, the king of Teyvat, and the sovereigns and all bishops and dragons, the only inhabitants of Teyvat. At this point in time, Celestia didn't even exist. As far as we know, Teyvat, the seven nations, the entire terrain and landscapes was completely different. The atmosphere, everything, the ozone. We don't even know what the real sky looked like at this point. And this is where the first descender, the heavenly principles, the primordial one, descended to Teyvat and established a new world order over this world. The primordial one created 4 shining shades that represent the aspects of existence. The primordial one is the progenitor god of all humans in Teyvat, and allegedly came from another world, again another world out there, and currently serves as the ruler of Celestia and Teyvat, suggesting that the current Celestia is still ruled by the primordial one. And because the first Descender is quite literally the first entity who came to Teyvat from outside the world, there's no record of them in Irminsul. We know that the primordial one defeated the 7 sovereigns, the ancient dragons, who were the strongest and primordial rulers of their element in sovereignty. Now, after their defeat, the sovereigns weren't killed, and the dragons were allowed to live under the domain of the primordial one under their rule. Celestia was created or established. We don't really know exactly how it appeared or got there, but it is suggested that Celestia was warped through a portal, appeared here, not just like created with brick and stone. The ancient civilizations in Chenyu Vale sort of paint this picture because there's no such thing as a crescent moon in Genshin. It's the same fake moon that illuminates the sky day in and day out. But if you actually look at the Battle Pass trailer, you can see Celestia and the kingdom in the heavens actually manifest. It's very subtle, but it's there. There's also nothing to suggest that there was any barriers preventing people from coming and going from Teyvat, so the Dragon King left. And the civilizations created and ruled over by the primordial one prospered. No one went hungry. War was almost non-existent. Some bishops and dragons fled to the Dark Sea, but some bishops and dragons integrated with humans. And for the most part, the primordial one, its 4 shades, and all of the goddesses and angels were living within Teyvat that are now Seelies, prospered. This was a millennia of peace and prosperity. We don't even know exactly how big Celestia was. I don't believe the Celestia that we can see in the sky today is the real Celestia. I believe that's what is shattered beyond the false sky. Seeing as that Celestia is said to be massive, with kingdoms and different domains, with many gods living there, I believe the current Celestia we can see in the sky in the current Teyvat is like the opening door we go through to actually enter the game in the loading screen. That door is what separates the false sky from the real world outside Teyvat. But that still begs the question, why did the primordial one come here? The heavenly principles, why Teyvat? And how did the dragons get here? That we're going to explore at the ender parts of the video, because this whole thing gets blown out of the water. But sticking with Teyvat and the rule of the primordial one in its heyday, there was also in Celestia a lunar palace with 3 moon sisters, Arya, Sana, and Canon, ancient goddesses who, according to Teyvat, served as the three moons. Following a certain great calamity, the great war that's soon to come, the two sisters died, and the corpse of only one of the sisters continues to illuminate the sky today. I think the illumination of that moon sister that's died is fake. The real corpse is what we got a glimpse at. A shattered moon sister and a shattered corpse that is a broken moon beyond the false sky concealed to us. And I really am starting to suspect that maybe Paimon is the last remaining moon sister, since it's only after Paimon that we can actually wish on the banners. It's funny how we talked about everyone's data integrated through the constellations in the skies and stars within Teyvat, and we're able to wish upon the constellations for characters because their data's up there. Even the wish banner system's canon within the lore of Genshin. It's crazy. But we can only do this once we meet Paimon, who literally has a primo gem on her, literally looks like the Walking Moon character. Pretty much all the item shop is linked with Paimon. It's even called Paimon's Shop. And Welkin even means heavens or abode of the gods. The triquetra, I'm probably butchering that, but the symbol on her chest is usually something that comes in threes. The three moon sisters. The moon itself, Paimon, the primo gems, pretty much all the item shop items are linked to Paimon. It's not even subtle, which means I might have been wrong about the whole primordial one being Paimon. But it seems obvious to me that the primordial one created the moon sisters as well as the four shades and all the other gods and Seelies and angels that lived in Celestia. Like the four shades, had their own duties, life, death, time. I believe the sisters, their duty was to manage fate, the goddesses of fate. It's also very interesting learning about the circumstance of the moon sisters, how two of them died. One of them we could probably see their remains, the other we're not sure. But a full illuminated moon symbolizes celebration, good luck, good fortune. It's a good omen. But something else that's big in Genshin Impact is the Crimson Moon. That could very well be a fallen moon sister. The Blood Moon is quite literally a symbolism of the darker side, rage, grief, all the negatives that the full moon represents. There is a very good chance that Paimon, like all the angels and Seelies of Celestia, the four shades were banished to Teyvat after the war in the heavens took place. Perhaps Paimon might have even played a part in establishing the new world of Teyvat, the new mechanisms of fate, and the constellations. Perhaps she had no choice by the heavenly principles, but now forgets, seeing as that it was hinted that she could betray us. Maybe she betrayed her sister, hence why there is now a Crimson Moon, an enraged moon. No, it's kind of funny, I made a video how Arlecchino's 4th rank might not do her justice because she seems to be able to manipulate a power over fate. You see the strings, preventing us from even moving an inch, as she soundly defeats us. We've talked so much about how the moons, Paimon, the moon sisters, are all connected with fate, the laws and the constellations that make up the false world and sky that is Teyvat. Well, don't you find it coincidentally interesting that Conria, a nation that's been dabbling outside those rules for some time now, not only are both of their major dynasties named after events that happen with the moon, the Eclipse Dynasty and the Crimson Moon Dynasty, but because we know two moon sisters were killed, and the remains of dead gods, their ambitions and hatreds can linger and corrupt individuals, I gotta wonder if Conria and its Crimson Moon Dynasty sought to harness this power of fate and the Crimson Moon, the enraged remains of a dead moon sister, from outside of the false sky, since we know Conria loves to dabble outside of Teyvat. They've done this so many times at this point it's hard to keep track. And now someone like Arlecchino is cursed with this power and can somewhat manipulate the mechanism that is the false sky in Teyvat, which is why she glitches, literally glitches in this simulation world that we're all in. Kind of interesting. If the Moon Sisters are linked with fate in Teyvat, and Conria, who is known to dabble outside Teyvat, has found a way to harness a remains of a moon sister, the one nation above all that's been trying to defy fate and the laws of Teyvat since day one. It kinda adds up to me, and both their dynasties are named after lunar events, and now we're seeing a dead moon in the sky. This can't be a coincidence. And for those of you that still might be skeptical, what does Dainsleif say to us? We can reweave fate? No. He says, the threads of fate can be yours to reweave.
Then, the threads of all fate will be yours to reweave.
Which is exactly how Arlecchino immobilizes us. And if you still think Paimon's not linked to this, look what this Melozine says. Strings that not only go into the sky, but above the sky itself. But this is as good a time as any to talk about the second who came, the second throne of the heavens, who appeared in Teyvat also as another descender. After the primordial one, humanity and all of the creations were thriving, and a great battle took place. The heavens and the earth were ravaged, the most apocalyptic event in Teyvat's entire history. Enkanomiya was sunk under the water. It quite literally says in the game that the heavens collapsed, and that the earth was rent asunder. The ancestral home of the original inhabitants was decimated during the conflict. And this entire time period, I think Istroth was referring to as before the sun and moon, before the fake false sky sun and moon. Now here is where it gets interesting. They fought, but due to severe damage they sustained during this conflict, the primordial one could no longer use their absolute authority to suppress the original order of the world. This caused the primordial one to collaborate with the one who came after, the second who came, and they created a gnosis to maintain order. And this is where the whole new system of Teyvat pretty well started. The false sky, the 7 archons, and their gnosis, and pretty well the new world order. But remember how we talked about the Dragon King leaving after he was bitter about being usurped? Well, during the time of the primordial one, the other sovereigns, they were also still pretty bitter about being usurped by the primordial one over their king, but they still lived in Teyvat. But Nibelung would change all of this when he returned with forbidden knowledge once he returned to Teyvat, and led the dragons into another ancient war, and this would be the continuation of the War of the Heavens. This war continued to cause immense destruction, and this is where I truly believe the Abyss and Abyssal corruption was first introduced to Teyvat in general. Apparently the world and heavens was on the brink of collapse, and finally the dragons were officially defeated, now really enraged and embittered. And during this conflict, officially Nibelung was killed, and the divine nails now cast to Teyvat the mend the land, because the damage now was irreversible. The catastrophe alone, but now introducing forbidden knowledge, outsidely world powers, and the abyssal corruption. The divine nails were meant to mend the earth. And this further changed the entire landscape of Teyvat. The lush jungly forest of Sumeru, most of it became a desert now. Dragonspine was a nice, lush mountain, now became a snowy wasteland. Sarami Island became a creepy, foggy island. There's even a celestial nail in the Night Kingdom in Natlan. And this is where I think the false sky first came into play, for multiple reasons. 1. Because most of the inhabitants of Teyvat were absolutely leveled during this catastrophe, the world that would continue forward would have to be much more closely monitored and maintained, with a much more strict set of rules and a status quo, in order to prevent this from ever happening again, preventing outside interference for what lies beyond Teyvat. But I also believe gods and deities cannot be completely erased or killed, as we learn in Genshin, and I do believe Nibelung is probably the catalyst for the 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah, especially if you look at Rhine-Daughter and all of her creations, or monsters that she summons from outside of Teyvat are dragons, Durin, Elia, to name a few. And that Khaenri'ah in general is kind of like the last remnants of humanity that remembers the old way of the world, has connected with Irminsul, being that the King of Khaenri'ah has references to Odin and the world tree being Irminsul. They were a nation always developing outside the laws of Teyvat, gaining forbidden knowledge all this time, being one of the most advanced civilizations in all of Teyvat. The ruin guards and ruin machines that they've had over the years are technologies from outside of Teyvat, point blank. And this is where the Gnosis came into existence. Now, I really do believe, all of this considered, Nibelung coming back was the 3rd Descender. Descenders can be individuals that come to Teyvat that have earth-shattering abilities. It doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't originally an inhabitant. So by the game's own definition, Nibelung could be considered a Descender. Not to mention, the Gnosis represent the authority of the elements of Teyvat. Nibelung being the king of the original Teyvat would actually make sense, considering the dragons and the sovereigns are the most connected with the original purest form of the elements. and it only makes sense that the king of all the dragons would be associated with all elements. So it only makes sense that the authority of the elements would be within the king and its remains. Hence, the third descendant remains being Nibelung, the dragon king who was usurped and came back. It also makes complete sense how an individual like Nibelung would be more than powerful enough to incentivize the Fatui Harbingers to collect their remains. Being that I just talked about Conria being connected with the dragons and Nibelung as well, they would totally be aware of what the Gnosis is and what it can do. And if they plan to destroy Irminsul, I think this power would be more than capable of not only doing that, but challenging the heavens once more. Now, because of Nibelung's war and the war with the second who came, I believe Celestia was shattered beyond repair, and I believe abyssal corruption and forbidden knowledge that Nibelung brought was just too much of a catastrophe for Celestia. It could not be maintained, so I think it was isolated through this barrier that is now the false sky. All the Seelies, the ancient gods, the Shades, were banished and sent to Teyvat, and the old original Celestia, which was a massive kingdom with many gods and angels residing within it, was isolated off. It was contaminated beyond repair. It was shattered, as stated in the game many times. And this is now where the Archon War would take place. Orobashi, who lived in Chenyu Vale, would be defeated and driven out by Rex Lapis, flee to Enkanomiya to avoid being slaughtered, and learn the truth of the original world of Teyvat from the original civilizations. The Shades descending to help the people. Istroth went to Enkanomiya to help, and then to Mondstadt, the Shade of Death to Natlan, and possibly Shesnaya as hinted in the Archon quest with Capitano, being named Renova. And Renova could be very well how the Fatui Harbingers know all these ancient secrets, since the Shade of Death would have known all of that. King Deshret was offered a gnosis from Celestia, being the strongest god in Sumeru. But King Deshret also learned the truth from Nabu, who is an angel of Celestia, the goddess of flowers. So he declined and knew the facade that was now the false sky, and he did not want to be a puppet god for Celestia to maintain the status quo. We all know what happened to him in his civilization. Zhongli, I do truly believe Zhongli's connected with the Shade of Space or Void. Space in general is in direct unity with Earth and with stone, similar to how Venti's connected with the irreversible changing of time. That kind of resembles wind. It's always changing, flowing, never stopping, and both being original Archons also is been a significant thing since day one. They are both very correspondent with the shades that they're most likely associated with. Just something to note. The whole point of that is now, the Seven Nations are established with their Archons under the new Celestia, the new rules and the new mechanisms under the False Sky and Irminsul. Everything beforehand is forbidden, quite literally. A good example is like an antivirus within a computer. Forbidden knowledge or learning ancient secrets of the old world, beyond the False Sky and the shattered Celestia, and the war that took place. If you learn those secrets, the antivirus kicks in. This is where Elazar and the Withering manifest onto humans and people who learn these secrets. Gods are not immune to this either, and are either killed or sentenced to death. Conria has forever been a subterranean nation trying to defy the world and laws of Teyvat. I honestly believe that Conria has been utilizing and weaponizing the remains of dead gods, mainly the Moon Sisters. Zhongli is not integrated into Irminsul. He remembers Rukkhadevata, but Paimon doesn't, or didn't. So Paimon is integrated into the mechanism of the False Sky in the New World, even though she's 1000% from Celestia. The reason being is because, like I said, I think Paimon was a key part in integrating the new mechanism of controlling recording and predetermining everyone's fate. I think she was a key component to the new mechanism of constellations and the new world of Teyvat. So she's integrated into Teyvat the same way our sibling is, and the same way we are now, kind of, with our new ancient name in Natlan. We're now going to be recorded within Natlan. I feel like Paimon being the main source as to why everyone's fate has been hijacked, and the entire purpose of the False Sky and everyone living within it, I feel it gives a lot of merit to her being the mascot of the game, being important, being linked with the item shop and all the items, the Moon Sister's fate as we talked about, but also the fact that she's been hinted multiple times to possibly betray us. But I don't think it's her fault, nor do I think she's doing it on purpose. So I think that gives us a benchmark to establish everything that's happened and is currently happening in a timely manner, right up until our current game events, where we shatter the false sky and get a glimpse at one of the shattered and broken corpses of a Moon Sister, most likely. Considering the game actually tells us that the Moon Sister's corpse can be seen in the sky to this day. A nice fake moon was placed there to hide the real one, and everyone trying to reweave and defy fate in their own way. Now, this is where the video gets really interesting. What are the Descenders coming here from? Why are they here to begin with? And what's outside Teyvat? What is beyond Celestia if what we're seeing is a shattered Celestia? Well, there are many things that lie beyond the stars, since we know that these games are all connected and the HoYoverse is vast. Up until this point, Genshin's been the most isolated of the HoYoverse games, but now that's starting to shatter. Obviously, we've had Descenders, we have had people like Skirk and the Narwhal creep into Teyvat. All the Ruin Guards and Mechas are technologies that have been stolen from other worlds. It's always been connected, but it's always been taboo for Teyvat and its citizens in any era to bring that stuff here. There's a reason Teyvat is the most medieval setting of all the games, the least technologically advanced. And go figure, the most technologically advanced nation is Fontaine, the only nation that really fully utilizes the quantum and imaginary elements or energies. They don't even know what it's called though, so they call it Ocean and Numian energies. See, the light realm and the void realms have always been counterparts to each other that make up the known existence and energies of the universe and the world. The Lord of Night actually even references this, referring to Teyvat's primordial form of energy, that the heavenly principles used it as a basis for creation of elemental energy, better to counter the abyss or the void energy, or could be better known as quantum. She tells us that the light in human realms would take too long to explain, but light reflects into 7 different colors, which collectively refers to as a rainbow. Elemental energy is similar to this concept. It's the modern concept of those ancient energies. The elements directly come from the imaginary energies that come from the imaginary tree, which is basically the centerpiece of the HoYoverse multiverse. It's the world tree of the multiverse of all the worlds and universes within HoYoverse. So let me simplify this in an easy to understand way, breaking down the HoYoverse to its most direct, primitive roots. The imaginary tree and the Sea of Quanta are each other's enemies. They're more or less opposites of each other that really are balanced in a sense. They're trying to consume each other at all times. This is what the Sea of Quanta looks like from in the game. You don't believe me? Don't believe this is connected to Genshin? Look at the narwhal that does not come from Teyvat whatsoever. When that swallows you, look where you are. You are no longer in Teyvat. The branches and the leaves on the tree represent different universes or timelines, and sometimes those timelines or worlds can fall into the Sea of Quanta as a bubble universe or world. Now there's a phenomenon that the imaginary tree creates called the Honkai. That's what this all boils down to. The Honkai is a phenomenon. It could be anything that's world-ending. Disease, disasters, storms, calamities, monsters, plagues, anything that can end civilization and end your world. That is what it is. It'll manifest into anything that can devastate you. It's a concept. And it's almost like a purging system of the imaginary tree to test out different universes and leaves off the branches. The ones that fail drop into the Sea of Quanta. And the Honkai is something that can't be defeated. It's reoccurring. It's something that people within Honkai Impact 3rd are trying to escape and combat at all times. And there are beings called Herrschers that are able to combat the Honkai and utilize its energies in very crazy ways. Most of the export characters of Genshin Impact characters are exports of famous or renowned Herrschers from Honkai Impact 3rd. Now this is important for multiple reasons, because the export characters are like different universe characters of the same character. Think of the Spider-Verse. Different versions of Peter Parker that have gone through different things. They're different people, but they're the same. I talked about this concept in my Raidenverse video. 3 different characters with 3 different stories, but it ultimately is the exact same. They all go through very similar things, and now we're learning with Himiko, Mawika, and probably Honkai Star Rail Himiko too, that they're all going to die. There's a lot of dualities here between these export characters. which all connects them to the roots of the imaginary tree. Now, obviously, I can't say for sure if Teyvat is on this imaginary tree as one of the leaves, one of the worlds, or in the Sea of Quanta as one of these bubble-isolated universes trying to protect itself from the encroachment. The Sea of Quanta is where quantum shadows are born and produced. It's also the place where many worlds reside. If you look at Conria, the ruined technology, the different monsters or entities, beasts, dragons that they've summoned through the years, through the Abyss and different rifts. The Sea of Quanta itself is a lot like the Abyss, and not just how it functions, but even the abyssal energy that we see, the purplish, darkish energy that a lot of characters use that is clearly not on the elemental charts. They have a lot of similarities. The Abyss and abyssal corruption that comes with it seems to be like the main antagonist of Genshin Impact, as Mawika tells us, but it is all represented by like a red or darkish reddish color, kind of like we can see that apocalyptic dark red color beyond the false sky. Now, what is abyssal corruption and what is the Abyss? It could very well just be what's beyond Teyvat through the Sea of Quanta, and that abyssal corruption that comes into Teyvat as a plague could just be how the Honkai enters Teyvat. Because the Honkai, like I talked about, can be a phenomenon. It doesn't have to be anything particular. It's designed to destroy civilization. And the more advanced that your civilization gets, the more drawn out the Honkai is. It's quite literally a purging system within the HoYoverse that prevents civilization from getting too far advanced. What does she say at the beginning of the game? The arrogation of mankind? Conria? Becoming so advanced in such a short time by gathering technologies and outworldly knowledge, the art of Kemia, the 5 sinners, and Nibelung did the exact same thing back in the day when the war took place in the heavens. The reason Genshin Impact has been so isolated from the other games and the Honkai in general, and the reason why Genshin doesn't have the word Honkai in its title, I think that's the significance of Genshin Impact. It's found a way to isolate itself from all of this. At least it's tried to. There's always been cracks in the seal. People from Honkai Impact 3 have been fighting this phenomenon for a long time, and Honkai Star Rail has its own calamities. And right now those two games are crossing over big time. Different characters are jumping over from game to game, not even exports, but the actual characters, and they're doing a lot of collabs. And I think Genshin Impact is going to be the last place that slowly builds towards that connection. And this is the part of the video now. And this is the part of the video where we explore that connection. But I would like to note first that I think the Heavenly Principles itself is corrupted by this corruption, whether it's the Honkai or not, represented by that darkish reddish color. It does also seem like the Heavenly Principles teleports from wherever the false sky is that we can see in that rift that Mawika blew apart in the sky. It seems that the Heavenly Principles portaled from there to confront us when we try to leave. I do also believe the Heavenly Principles got contaminated themselves when they had to intervene in Conria, which is why they haven't been seen for 500 years. And the Heavenly Principles has to maintain the borders of Teyvat at all times. And they are definitely weakened or injured. Maybe they were almost even killed because of this. I mean, what's the other explanation of the Heavenly Principles being asleep or being away for 500 years? That they're taking a vacation? They're taking a break or a nap? If they're not injured, that doesn't make any sense. All the crap that's been going on, the Gnosis being seized by the Fatui, Archons dying, dragons being reinstated, they would not stand for this if they weren't severely injured or trying to maintain the borders and the false sky. Holy shit. That is Teyvat. That little cube she put her sibling in. We're like in a mini little snow globe, aren't we? Haha, I'm just kidding. And much like the false sky in Teyvat revealed, regardless if that's the broken Celestia that we know that happened during the war, or if that's just what's outside of Teyvat, the grim reality, that actually checks out. Look at Honkai Star Rail. Characters like Firefly, who have fought in many calamities, Acheron in her home world and the devastation and utter destruction. The world outside Teyvat in the other games are grim to say the least. Most people in worlds have been shattered beyond repair. In the broader sense, the realities outside of Teyvat are much darker and more grim. Being controlled by a false sky and having a set of rules to live in prosperity in your little medieval planet is really not so bad when you start to take the magnifying glass off. And if you think these games are not connected, recently we got more collabs with Kiana Kazlana and Memo Keepers from Honkai Star Rail crossing over to Honkai Impact 3rd, along with Welt Yang. He's not an export character, he quite literally jumped over from one game to the other. He's the exact same character, brings his backstory with him and everything. We also got Sparkle from Honkai Star Rail that's now appeared in Honkai Impact 3rd. And if you think Teyvat is no different, look at Alloy. Look at the Narwhal, look at Skirk. How did Chile get his crazy powers? Where do you think all this forbidden knowledge comes from? All the Conria technology. All the forbidden knowledge, it comes from somewhere. And somebody pointed this out to me in my last video in a comment, and I'm going to bring it up now. There's a very interesting description in one of the limited events, where you're literally just mixing drinks. Now I'll be honest with you, I didn't even pick up on this. So thank you for sharing this. This is why I tell you to leave your thoughts in the comments. I do read the comments, and this is exactly why. Now, in Honkai Star Rail, this game covers the universe, like the solar system, many worlds and planets. Like Teyvat would be one little blip on the radar of the many worlds and calamities in Honkai Star Rail. It's a much more broad game, way more technologically advanced, and the IPC is a faction within Honkai Star Rail that acts as like the biggest global intergalactic inter-universe government / authorities. They're basically an intelligence network that pretty much monitors the entire universe, the trading networks, the currency, the laws. It goes deep. I'm not going to get too much into that. But essentially, one of the departments of that organization, the Strategic Investment Department, stumbled upon an ancient, long-forgotten planet named, and then it's Teyvat but with the V and the Y switched. This is so obvious. This planet's history predates even the birth of some eons. There was a kingdom ruled by 2 princesses. The elder sister was a gentle and non-combative ruler. The younger sister was a brave warrior. When war broke out, in order to protect her younger sister, the elder sister secretly joined the battle but tragically lost her life in that final moment. Years later, a traveler from a distant land guided by the older sister's consciousness helped the younger sister find the tree. There, the elder sister's consciousness imparted her final teachings and blessings upon her sister, allowing her to grow into a true leader who could guide the kingdom towards peace and prosperity. To commemorate this legendary tale, the IPC dedicated this beverage named Ball Royale. Ball is the name of the Electro Archon, and this is the story of the Raiden Shogun sisters. How Raiden Makoto used the sacred Sakura to help protect Inazuma from the future during Raiden A's second story quest. This tells the exact story, and the IPC got their hands on it. This is around the time Acheron, who's an export character of Raiden Shogun and Raiden Mei, released in Honkai Star Rail. So it makes sense. Like I said, the export characters are not all the same, but they're connected. The Herta Space Station also got their hands on a glider from Genshin Impact, as well as the weapon of Himiko Marada, who's a Herrscher in Honkai Impact 3rd. Herta is one of the smartest people in the entire cosmos. She's an emanator of erudition, the literal god of intelligence. She got her hands on these items. This all connects everything together. This literally confirms that these games are connected. Now, what's even more interesting, you want to keep going down the rabbit hole, as this states that Teyvat might have existed in very ancient Honkai Star Rail times, long before most of the eons were even around yet. And even in Honkai Star Rail, there are events that aren't even recorded, so to speak, because they're so far back in the past. The ancient past of the literal universe. And this same person mentioned the Dusk Wars, which got me thinking. The Dusk Wars was a period of history before the Amber Eras, well, basically kind of when they started recording concrete history within Honkai Star Rail. Most calamities in Honkai Star Rail take place like galactically wide. The Swarm Disaster, the Dusk Wars, it doesn't take place on 1 or 2 planets, it's intergalactic. And the Dusk Wars is a period in time where the Leviathans conquered the galaxies, the Devourer of Worlds, and they were loyal followers to Ouroboros, one of the oldest and probably might even be the oldest Eon in Honkai Star Rail. Ouroboros of Veracity, an endless glutton for hunger and devouring worlds. And these Leviathans also devoured worlds and everything they could get their hands on. But what does this have to do with Teyvat? Well, like we just read, this story that the IPC had about the Raiden Shogun sisters, this epic tale of two sisters in Teyvat, this world that predates pretty well all the eons. It's a very ancient world in Honkai Star Rail terms, which means in Honkai Star Rail's current game, Teyvat's entire story would have happened long ago. The Leviathans are also mysterious life forms that are ancient and roam the galaxy long before the eons were born. And like I said, they caused the Dusk Wars, which is how Claypath of Preservation came into existence, eons being metaphysical paths manifested into a god. If Teyvat existed long before the eons, and the Leviathans were roaming the galaxy long before the eons, interesting, because what is the Narwhal? Because that's where the Narwhal comes in. I literally talked about this in my Emanators video, but the all-devouring Narwhal is the closest thing we'll ever see so far to a Leviathan of Ouroboros, a visitor from the far side of the Sea of Stars. We don't know much about this thing, but we know that it's not from Teyvat. And Sir Talugi, who's a five sinner of Conria, them known to dabble outside Teyvat, I think Sir Talugi snagged one of the Leviathans roaming the galaxy, and it's one of his pets. We also really don't know where Skirk comes from either, but I guess I bring this all up to say that maybe the heavenly principles in the primordial one took over Teyvat to begin with to protect it from the outside threats, create a nice little world that is safe from the Honkai, safe from the all-devouring Narwhals and the Leviathans roaming around the galaxy, and the many other threats that are out there, because let me tell you, they are. You don't even want to go into the Swarm disaster. That is the last thing you want to deal with in Teyvat. The point I'm trying to make though is, I think summoning all of these outside creatures through the Abyss means they have to travel through the Sea of Quanta, where they get contaminated and bring not only abyssal corruption, but forbidden knowledge. And because it's not compatible with Teyvat and how it's structured, its mechanisms, its rules, it more often than not results in great calamity, no matter how it's used or where it is. The Honkai also targets civilization that's more advanced, which is why I think Teyvat is more primitive and more medieval. If it advances too far, then the will of the Honkai will be drawn to it. And Fontaine is inching oh so closer to this, because not only have they discovered quantum and imaginary energies from outside Teyvat, but they're definitely more advanced than anywhere else. In comparison to the other HoYoverse worlds out there, they're not even close, but if they keep pushing too far, it could spell disaster. And the timeline within Teyvat existing in Honkai Star Rail as well as the Leviathans actually makes sense for Nibelung, the dragons, and how the original inhabitants of Teyvat might have came into existence. I've wanted to make a video about this for a long time, but I've just been so busy with other videos, so let me know in the comments if you'd like to see this, but I'll summarize it very quickly. I think Nibelung, along with the Sovereigns, are the offspring of Long the Permanence, the dragon eon of permanence. And let me tell you, this fits so well. The concept and path of permanence truly does fit all of the dragons within Teyvat, but this is a deceased eon and one of the oldest eons as well, which fits the timeline of Teyvat and the Leviathans. But it said Long of Permanence traveled to many worlds, leaving behind its descendants that are known as Scions, the children of Long, and that this godly dragon is the progenitor of all dragons in the universe, meaning he's the original ancestor of all the dragons ever. Go figure. So that might explain the origins of how even the dragons got to Teyvat first, because they would have had to come from somewhere. They didn't just appear out of nowhere. And it's not a coincidence that they happened to be all dragons before the primordial one showed up. Again, this is a whole bag of worms I want to go over in its own video. Let me know if you'd like to see that. But that might explain exactly why the dragons existed in Teyvat, why they're so immensely powerful, how they've been integrated with Teyvat and the Light Realm, the different elements, and why they actually follow and represent permanence. When a dragon sovereign dies, they are reborn. Just look at Neuvillette. He's not the original Hydro Sovereign. They do resemble permanence. And at the end of the day, the Heavenly Principles might just be somebody from Honkai Impact 3rd or Honkai Star Rail that wanted to escape and protect this new world from the Honkai and the outside threats, and needed to conquer it to do it. wanted to create civilization and create a world that everyone could enjoy, and for the dragon's own good and protection of the outside world had to conquer. Maybe the false sky is necessary to protect Teyvat all along. Maybe sacrificing your freedom is what it costs to avoid the Honkai. Or maybe since we know Herta creates a simulated universe to try to map out the ancient histories of the entire universe of Honkai Star Rail, and because the IPC hinted at Teyvat was an ancient world in that old ancient past, maybe we're in one of her simulated universes right now. Who can really say? But before I wrap up the video, I want to talk about, well, the Travelers, since we haven't really talked about them specifically yet. And I personally think they're some of the most overcomplicated characters. I feel people overcomplicate the Travelers, especially since they're interchangeable as playable characters and gender roles, because obviously a lot of the voice lines, the Battle Pass trailer, the different trailers we had with Lumine being the Abyss sibling, really confuses people, like which one is canon to be the playable one and which one's canon to be the Abyss sibling. Well, they already confirmed that they're both canon to be playable and the Abyss sibling, which automatically makes people believe that, well, then Lumine can't be the person in the Battle Pass trailer, or the person that Dainsleif's referring to when talking about if you're worthier than I to rescue her. And it quite literally talks about one of the royal siblings got corrupted by the Genesis Pearl. Remember how I talked about Nibelung influencing Conria after his demise? Most dragons in this game are serpent-like, and she becomes the Abyss sibling. And then the next crown prince descends to pick up where they left off. Quite literally, us. Venti says it's our story, but I think it's interchangeable. A lot of different games do this, when they have different characters you can pick as the main character. If you obviously choose Lumine as your main character, then I think you just switch the roles, similar to the trailers. I don't think this means that trailer isn't about them. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think that's where we overcomplicate the lore and the subtle details. They just have to definitively choose one character to be the Abyss sibling in a trailer. So they usually choose Lumine to be consistent, but it can be either or. If you pick Lumine as your playable character, then simply for all these trailers just swap the names and the roles. Because it was hinted at in the game too that Ether also likes these flowers. We learned that in the Chasm. So obviously we have to save them. As for the true meaning of our journey, Heavenly Principles didn't kill us point blank instead of capturing us. Why did she let us even roam around to begin with? And before you say, well, that's not the Heavenly Principles, that's just the Sustainer. That is another instance where I think people get hung up on the name and overcomplicate it. I really don't believe the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles to be a shade. I think this is the Heavenly Principles that's now corrupted after the Cataclysm that created the false sky. Why do I think this? Well, for one, Nahida straight up tells us this. The entity that stopped us, the Heavenly Principles, this was her. She's referring to this character.
I'm sure you remember the entity that changed your fate, the Heavenly Principles.
I think people get hung up on the word sustainer too much. But as for why we're allowed to roam around, in some Chinese voice lines of the Traveler, it definitely hints towards us eventually becoming the next ruler of Teyvat, succeeding the Heavenly Principles, and perhaps the Heavenly Principles needs us to harness all the elements to do this to save Teyvat and succeed her. Maybe she is going to die, or maybe she wants to harness a new set of Gnosis from us. If you can do it with a third Descender, I don't see why you can't do it with a fourth. Maybe she needs to make a new set of Gnosis to help stabilize Teyvat. As for why she didn't let us leave if we're Travelers, well, because the arrogation of mankind. The fact that we were intervening with Conria, the fact that we aided Conria. Probably some in there. If I was the Heavenly Principles, I would not be okay with this either, nor would I want them to leave. That would piss me right off. The fact that they were meddling with the affairs of the false sky in the world that's Teyvat, especially if it's for everyone's own good to protect from outside threats, I would definitely be pissed off as well. Who knows, maybe we're gonna get some crazy Xenoblade Chronicles type twist where the Travelers are just two scientists that created this new simulated world with a conduit, and now they're integrated with that world in this whole story. Maybe they're trapped in a time loop. Maybe drastic measures and a time loop, a constant samsara is how you actually avoid the Honkai. It's the only way. Maybe we're just trying to break the time loop. There's a lot of interesting theories and possibilities when talking about the endgame here of Teyvat. how the travelers will finish their story, and what the true purpose of the Heavenly Principles has been all along. But if you know HoYoverse, you know that it's not black and white. There's no real just plain Jane good and evil. More often than not, it usually consists of a lot of gray area with characters and their motives. Whether it be Conria and the devastation they caused, the Fatui Harbingers trying to liberate, but the genocide and atrocities they've committed, the many wars that have taken place throughout Teyvat, the Archons that are good-natured but have tons of blood on their hands, or the Heavenly Principles. I guess only time will tell. But if you've watched this far, I just want to say thank you so much. I really do hope you enjoyed the video. Like I said, I do read the comments, so leave me your thoughts. Do you agree with me on most of these points? Maybe there's some half-truths, but regardless, this is what makes these games so fun, to speculate and to try to put the pieces together. Remember, I do have my second channel up and running if you want to check it out. It mainly focuses on HoYoverse soundtracks and music. It's a channel that I've made with the wife if you want to check it out. We only just started and we're going to make a ton of different playlists for different themes around Genshin, Honkai Star Rail, and then maybe expand to the other HoYoverse games over time. We just started, but if it's something you're interested, feel free to check it out. But if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow. I really do appreciate you all watching this far, and as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.